Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you, Tyra, for being here to help facilitate this conversation. Over the past few months, we have been hosting these virtual town halls to discuss my proposed budget and going in depth into how the budget is centered in not just our immediate recovery, but long-term change. That is why today I want to focus on one of the core central principles of this budget, equity. Because as many of us know, including the people joining me for this town hall today, everything comes back to equity. And how exciting is it that today our president signed the legislation declaring Juneteenth a federal holiday. Now, Black people, we've always celebrated Juneteenth. To us, it was the most important holiday of our community and our culture. But not only did our president sign the legislation to declare it a federal holiday, here in San Francisco today, I signed the declaration to ensure that it is a holiday in San Francisco and all city employees will officially have June 19th off every single year, starting with tomorrow. But check with your supervisors before you take the day off. Helping people become financially stable with good paying jobs, with pathways to success in their future careers, making sure children and youth have a quality education, making sure people can get around our city and can actually afford to live.
Recording in progress.
And as this pandemic has showed us, helping people stay safe and healthy, all of this is rooted in equity, because when we invest in supporting the most vulnerable or the most disproportionately impacted, we lift up not just our communities, but our entire city. And as we prepare to celebrate Juneteenth this weekend, we also recommit ourselves to doing the work to build a more equitable society by putting our money where our mouth is. We are facing a historic moment as we reopen and recover from this pandemic, because we're in a position where more people from historically underserved communities are at the table, making sure that their voices are being heard and being a part of the process. We are actively working with all of our diverse communities, our Black, Latino, Asian Pacific Islander, and American Indian communities, our LGBTQ community, women, families, and children, and many others, to actively invest in programs that lift these communities up and support them now and into the future. With that, I'd like to introduce the other panelists that are joining us here today. Many of you probably know Dr. Cheryl Davis, AKA Sister Davis, Director of the Human Rights Commission for San Francisco, Shakira Simley, the Director of the Office of Racial Equity, Diana Ponce de Leon, who is with the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and Patsy Tito, Executive Director of the Samoan Community Development Center. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Tyra, so that we can get started.
Yes, and I want to thank you, Mayor, for being here. I know it's the eve of Juneteenth and you have a lot going on, so we really appreciate you taking the time. I have a few questions that were given to us by members of the public, and so I'm just going to go through them, and hopefully it will evoke a robust conversation. So the first question is for Mayor Breed, Director Davis, and Patsy Tito. In any way you all see fit. Of course, we want to start with our mayor. The question is, this budget seems to increase the funding for police, especially now in light of Black Lives Matter movement, our own problems in San Francisco police killings of unarmed people of color, and the closing of 850 Bryant. Why aren't we seeing these funds diverted to community-based solutions and climate emergency funding?
Well, to be clear, last year I diverted $120 million of the police budget specifically to the African American community. We have committed resources to helping uplift this community. But I also want to be clear that I am not completely defunding the police department. We need officers on the streets, but we also need officers who are from our communities and who know and respect our communities. When I think about not only the shootings that occur in various communities, but the attacks on many of our elderly Asian seniors, it's heartbreaking. And those families deserve to feel that someone is going to come to their aid. In fact, we've seen a number of arrests take place with a number of these violent crimes in recent months. And having a diverse and more robust police department is critical to the success of our city. Since we started to implement anti-bias training and a number of requirements within our department, as people retire, what we're finding with our new academy classes is that we're creating a more diverse workforce. We've seen a significant increase in the number of African Americans, Latinos, and Asian police officers in our workforce. We've seen officer involved shootings go down considerably. So it's not an either or. We're making the investments. In fact, not to mention the money that we've taken from the police department, but just the amount of money in general that we invest in the community is significant. We'll continue to do that, but it's not an either or for me. It's really about striking a balance and making sure that our police department is held accountable to serve and protect every member of any community in San Francisco, regardless of their race or sexual orientation or anything of that nature. The trainings we have in place, the work that we're going to continue to do will make it so. And I'm going to continue to lead this city and provide that balance.
Thank you, Mayor.
Well, I'll just jump in. I know that there's been questions about the Dreamkeeper dollars. And I think first and foremost, thanks to Mayor Breed for allocating those funds and for also providing space for community voice. So when folks say it's not going to community-based solutions, that whole process was driven by community. It is informed by community. And I think what's offensive to community, and I'll say specifically Black folks through this process, and I think Mayor, you've said this before, is when other people tell them what's best for them, right? So we had a community process. Community said, this is what we see as important and integral to really addressing public safety within our neighborhood and what are the practices that we want to see happen. And so we're going to give that a shot. We're going to try to actually invest in what community wanted to see happen. And other folks may not agree with that, but we know, and it's great to have Patsy on here because I know Patsy has been working in Sunnydale with Drew and with other community members to really build the solidarity, to be very intentional about that. And so I don't think it's okay for folks to be dismissive because it's not the community they want to be centered, but community-based solutions are happening. They are being rolled out and we're investing in that. And so really grateful for Patsy's leadership for us to be able to develop some of that. And I don't know, Patsy, did you want to chime in on that?
Sure. Yeah, I just want to appreciate this time given especially to the Pacific Islander community to be at this table to make sure that our voices are heard. As you said, Dr. Davis, as well as Madam Mayor, we're always about safety, public safety. We want to ensure that our community is safe. And I want to just make sure that, when we are getting ready to, when it's all rolled out, that we're at this table, that our voices are heard, and that we can make sure that we can all work together, because those are where we build our relationships in the community, and for us to build individuals so that we can build a better community that's safe and that we could all work together.
Great, thank you. That was a really robust answer, so we appreciate that. This next question is directed to Mayor Breed and Director Simley. How can we ensure that victim services are played out through a racial equity lens?
I'll just say one of the things in my upcoming proposed budget is to develop an Office of Justice Innovation, because what's happening right now is there's some victim services in our police department, victim services in the DA's office, and then there are a number of nonprofit organizations that we fund to provide support in victim services. It's not coordinated well enough to address the challenges that many people continue to face. And I'll tell you, as supervisors, a former member of the Board of Supervisors, sadly, what would happen is someone who was in my community may get, if there's someone who's killed because of gun violence, there's a whole program and there's a whole wraparound support that goes with helping that family, that goes with helping the community heal, but also covering the expenses, being that advocate in court when they're going through the process, if an arrest is made. There's all these different layers, right? And the problem is that they're somewhat scattered and somewhat confusing. Families want and deserve justice when they have been wronged. And what I am focused on is this Office of Justice Innovation has everything to do with being that advocate and that support to people who are victims of violence, whether it's sexual violence, whether it's gun violence or assault. We need to make sure that we are supporting and uplifting the families who tragically experience this, because it is traumatizing. I can't tell you how many of the mothers in this city and what they go through, to see the hurt and the pain in their eyes from the loss of their sons and still not receiving the justice that they deserve and they want for the killings of their kids, and not having a connection of anyone to help them through whatever the process is to get mental health support, to go through the court system as someone is possibly being tried for that particular situation. And for me, being supportive of all races is equally important. And that's where a number of nonprofit agencies come in, because of their connections with the community, making sure there's someone who can speak Cantonese and connect with someone and their family if they can't speak English. Making sure that there's someone who has a direct relationship. Lynn Wesley, who is someone who works for the Department of Public Health, she has been absolutely incredible. We love her in the Black community because of her activation and support and her advocacy, but she also works with other communities. So it does take a village, and I'm committed through our Office of Racial Justice to making sure that we have a diverse community of people that can help support and uplift victims, of any kind of crime in this city. We owe it to them to be better than what we see happening.
Thank you, Mayor. Director Simley?
Thank you so much, Tyra. Thank you so much, Madam Mayor. You summed it up. I will just want to add a couple things. Addressing victim safety and public safety and violence means addressing violence when it happens and before it happens. And a racial equity lens and public safety and community wellness prioritizes our San Franciscans who are most vulnerable and harmed by violence, which is overwhelmingly our communities of color. And it's been heartbreaking, really heartbreaking to see the attacks, the harassment and bias against our AAPI community. And we know the pain and the trauma felt by our Black, Latina, and Pacific Islander families who have lost loved ones too many and too soon. We also know that hate incidences and violence across communities in the United States and SF is increasing and escalating. And what we've seen in the mayor's budget is increased targeted support for those who've been harmed and dealing with increased fear and traumatization, not only at an individual level, also at a community level. And the mayor has committed over $65 million to address this, which is exciting and unprecedented. We also want to uplift that centering a racial equity lens means a transformative justice pathway through community partnerships. So it means doing things through and with community, not just on behalf of them or to them. It means that we are creative and look at different solutions, not one size fits all. And we're not going to treat our communities of color like a monolith. What works for one community may not work for another one, and that's okay. It means transparency and reporting and data and seeing who's being harmed. And it also means committing sufficient language access resources so our folks can be heard. And one thing that's super, super important that I want to uplift is addressing public safety and prioritizing community wellness needs to be done in a holistic sense, which means addressing structural and systemic violence, which is economic violence. It means not just tackling street violence, but going at the root and tackling crimes of hunger in times of need. And how do we work as a government to anticipate and meet the need? And that's what I want to uplift in the mayor's budget. And when we talk about racial equity and equity, where we see Mayor Breed's leadership in addressing that structural violence, which also harms our community even more so, and significant investments in homelessness and housing and education and food security, and having that being targeted toward our low income and our communities of color to make sure that everyone in San Francisco has the opportunity to thrive. And everyone has the opportunity to break the chains of that systemic oppression. So that is what we mean when we say a racial equity lens, and looking at it not just at an individual level, but a community level as well. And our mayor's proposed budget does that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So our next question is going to Director Davis and Ms. Ponce de Leon. Is it true that Black transgender business owners and entrepreneurs could receive all of the $3.75 million dedicated for Black business owners and entrepreneurs from the Dream Keepers initiative?
Deanna, I'll let you go first. Do you want to go first? Because it's your bucket.
Sure. And so from the Dreamkeeper initiative, we're super excited in terms of economic development and workforce in the level of investment that has gone from the Dreamkeeper initiative. In total invested amongst workforce and economic development, it's been about over $15 million. In our last RFP, which I think is where the question comes from, for small businesses, supporting 4 different buckets of economic development. The total was 3.75 million that went out for organizations to help support the areas of anti-displacement for Black-owned businesses citywide and providing services, lease negotiation, legal support. The other one was in technical assistance. The other was an organization that would help support cultural events citywide to help bring and attract people back to our economic corridors, specifically in majority or historically Black neighborhoods in the city of San Francisco. And the third one, the last one, the fourth one was incubation hubs. So helping to support and incubate small businesses and nonprofit organizations within neighborhoods. So those were the 4 buckets that spread across the 3.75. Specifically to support transgender small businesses, we did have a specific area in a previous RFP from the Dreamkeeper that was awarded $250,000 to help support specifically trans small businesses. In the 216, another area that was awarded was to support trans events citywide. And so those were the 2 areas of investment specifically for the trans community in the Dreamkeeper initiative targeted. But of course, our services, the relief, everything that comes through it is accessible to that community.
And so I would just add to that it may seem like they got the whole of the 3.75 million that was for economic development for businesses. But if we look at what happened is there is 1.142 million in the Human Rights Commission budget that is going specifically for Black trans initiatives. And so if you combine all those numbers, it's 3.75 or maybe somewhere near that number. And that might be the point of confusion. But if we look at the entire budget, the entire bucket, we can see, right, like there is 60 million total. And so across all of these buckets, there is money going to the Black trans community, but it is not the entirety of the 3.75 that Diana Ponce de Leon and Invest in Neighborhoods or the Office of Economic and Workforce Development has.
Thank you for that. I always like looking at visuals, so it's really, really helpful. So this question is specifically for Mayor Breed. What measures is the city taking to ensure a robust public transportation, Muni and BART included, that is equitable and reliable, especially for our service industry workers who are often low income and BIPOC? We can reopen the economy, but without the backbone of labor and infrastructure, there won't be much to come back to. So.
Well, during the pandemic, we made sure that the core services that needed to be available were available. And we helped to provide alternatives to Muni as well as discounted fares for essential trips. Our Muni system took a serious hit due to COVID, but thanks to funding from the federal administration, they are able to avoid massive service cuts and stabilize. Now, Muni is hiring and they're training drivers and workers, and it will take some time to train them so we can expand service again. And as they bring back routes, they are prioritizing the communities that are most dependent on Muni, including what oftentimes seems like the community that is neglected. I know Patsy is out there in Sunnydale, and we had hoped that the T-Line would be more of a resource to get people downtown faster. And that's been very problematic, and slow service on the 9 San Bruno as well has been challenging in that community. Our goal is to increase it. That's a long, long bus ride from that side of town. And the goal is to make sure that someone doesn't have to wait an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours for the next bus when they're trying to get to work at, any sort of hours during the day. But we are hiring. We look forward to hopefully people who live in different parts of our city applying for these great jobs with great benefits. We want to be able to make sure people are safe when they're riding Muni, so we have to train our drivers and really focusing on those communities that we know need it the most. I also want to add that I know that Jeff Tumlin, who's the head of MTA, is reevaluating a number of Muni lines, looking at the data, looking at the ridership, looking at the challenges in terms of getting to places to understand, how do we make service more efficient and more reliable? And that may mean lines could cut or be derailed or change. I know many of these lines have been in existence since I was a kid. I don't think many of them have changed. I can tell you what those routes are: the 19 Polk to the 9 San Bruno to the 31 Balboa. So we do need to look at some of these lines and look at making some changes, because the goal is, of course, to try and get people around the city who rely on Muni most, and that's what we plan to do.
Thank you for that, Mayor. Okay, this just in, hot off the press, to Director Simley. How are we working to advance racial equity within our own departments, especially to address how many people of color have often been overlooked for promotions, raises, so forth and so on?
Thank you so much, Tyra. So as we all know, the Office of Racial Equity was signed into law by Mayor Breed in 2019. And when I stepped into this role, one of the first things that I worked with Director Davis and championing was making sure that if we are going to have external equitable outcomes, we need to handle internal workforce equity. The Office of Racial Equity delivered on time in our COVID pandemic, our citywide racial equity framework, which is on our website, which directed all 54 departments to create racial equity action plans. All those plans from each department were received by the Mayor's Office and the Office of Racial Equity in the HRC at the end of December 2020. All of those racial equity plans, which we provided hundreds of hours of technical assistance and support for every single city department, is also on our website. Every city department has over the next several years to make advancements and implement said plans in a whole set of areas, including diverse and equitable leadership, looking at issues of promotions, looking at issues of recruitment, and making sure that they're creating a workplace that uplifts dignity, inclusion, and belonging. Those are specific. They have real outcomes that we are currently evaluating, and we'll continue to work with Mayor Breed and every our department heads to make sure that we're not just putting plans to paper, but actually getting things done. So we highly encourage everyone to head to our website to review said plans, and we will also be evaluating them. And we encourage any sort of feedback, and we'll continue to work with our city employees and our racial equity leaders to make sure this work happens in a systems approach.
Thank you. Well, it's really warm outside, but the public is active because we have another question. How does this investment actually translate to an increase of community services, and specifically to Patsy? Can you talk a little bit about these investments and how they help capacity building and with other things like staffing?
Thank you for the question. I think given what we went through this past year, and I'll just speak general, it really kind of hit the community as far as not being able to work, taking care of their families. So the pandemic really hit the community hard, and just trying to figure out how we can bring those resources back into the community, and just to kind of bring, do the economically mobility to kind of get families and folks back into the workplace. And so, the resources that that we can get in the community would be really helpful, just so that we can get folks back up on their feet and our families, given that, summer programs happening, kids are at different programming. This is a good chance to really get our families and parents working in the community.
And if I could, Tyra, I just want to say, I think that Patsy is being really pretty humble in terms of the importance of community and how they have stretched resources. And I know, you know, the mayor has been, I'm like always amazed because the mayor's like, how are we getting money to community, right? Like, I don't want it into a machine or into a system. Like, how are we making sure that the money gets to the folks who do the work? And I think that Mayor Breed and Patsy represent the investment into community and what can happen. And so, you know, this commitment that the mayor has to get money to the people that do the work, and the commitment of people like Patsy to actually do the work is what we have, where we have the capability to transform. Because when you talk about public safety, you know, the mayor has been really talking about this, but Patsy and Drew in Sunnydale, you know, the mayor was like, make sure they get what they need. They were doing food distribution before it was even thought of by the city to do that. And we were able to leverage resources that the mayor allocated to get that directly to Patsy. Drew was paying people, the mayor said, opportunities for all, like let him pay the folks in Sunnydale to do this work and to distribute, and Patsy joined in with that. So, you know, I just want to, you know, again, recognize you, Mayor Breed, because that commitment to investing in community is what really transforms community, because Patsy and her folks know where the need is.
And I think the bigger issue is to make sure that money is not a barrier to success. Because when you think about what happens and why people unfortunately commit crimes in some cases, you know, us growing up in the city, we saw, you know, things, you know, the kinds of things that we had to do to get money. You had folks selling drugs, you had people stealing clothes downtown to sell them, figuring out different ways to get money. And, you know, that shouldn't be the only option for folks. And that's really why these investments are important, because, you know, everyone's saying they don't want to see this stuff happen. I don't want to see it happen either. I don't want these kids to be breaking in cars like they are now. So what are we going to do to make sure they have another alternative so that choosing a life that could land them behind bars is not even something they think about? And Patsy and Drew in Sunnydale, in that area, they are the people who these kids trust the most. And when I say kids, there's some grown-ups too, but they still babies. And at the end of the day, it can't just be, well, we have a program for you, right? Because where are they getting money from? They don't have families that have all this money that they can just hand them money on a regular basis. So how do we make sure that they are held accountable, that they have some financial support in order to also help to take care of themselves and support their families? So it all goes hand in hand. And that's why, you know, these investments are important. We don't have money to waste. People are counting on us to, you know, get this money and spend it responsibly. Every dollar makes a difference. Every dollar is food for somebody to eat or clothes to put on their backs. And it's important that we continue to do this work. It's really a commitment that folks like Patsy and folks like Drew and others who really are very invested in the community, we're doing it with bare bones resources. And now our goal in my upcoming budget is to make it a little bit easier for them to do the work that they love to do for the community.
Thank you. Well, I know everyone wants to enjoy this rare, warm San Francisco night. So Mayor, I want to hand it over to you to wrap up, and thanks to all the panelists.
Well, I'll just say, I just want to know how many people are actually watching. It's so nice outside in San Francisco. It's going to be light outside. This is the time of year when the days are longer. So even past 8 o'clock, I remember, because, you know, like we had to go in the house when the street lights came on. So the street lights came on, but it was still light time. And I'm like, Mama, do we have to come inside? It's still light outside. And we got to stay out later. That's what I think about during daylight saving time. I don't know about you, but it's time to enjoy the city after a year of being cooped up in the house, and really a tough year for our city and so many communities in San Francisco. And I am just grateful to be here at this time where folks are able to put away their mask and able to go out and enjoy the sun and enjoy the summer. Today was an amazing day of Juneteenth celebrations. All weekend, there'll be a lot of great Juneteenth celebrations. Next weekend, there'll be a lot of great Pride celebrations. San Francisco prides itself on its diversity and being inclusive, and making sure that our investments reflect that diversity and that inclusiveness is important. And I just want to also say, it's not about this community's getting this and why isn't this community getting that. You know what my grandmother would always say, you can't control what other people do, right? You can only control what you do, and stop worrying about what's going on with somebody else. Worry about yourself, right? And what I'm saying is, make sure that we don't hate on one another. Let's make sure that we know where the needs are, and why don't we uplift and we support one another in receiving that level of support for those needs. You know, our trans community has a significant number of challenges, not just in San Francisco, but all over this country. The data makes it clear that they are a community that is deserving. And I will continue to invest in communities that need the resources to thrive. That's what equity is about. It's about being inclusive. It's not about putting one group against the other. It's about making sure we're making the right investments and we're seeing people's lives change as a result of that. So that's my goal, and I'm hoping to get this budget through the board and in the hands of, you know, all the great organizations and people that are out there doing the work. I want to make sure my kids are good this summer, that they're enjoying summer together, and our teenagers are getting paid so they don't drive their moms and dads and grandmas crazy with a lot of ask. So lots of work to do, a lot of great things happening in San Francisco. I want to thank all the panelists for joining us here today. Now go out there and have a good time today.